The email arrived late at night, timestamped just after midnight, sent from an address that looked hastily created, the kind people use when they are afraid of being traced. The sender asked that his real name never be spoken aloud, never written, never hinted at. For the sake of the story, the narrator refers to him as Daniel R., a man who claimed to have lived most of his life moving between small towns across the United States due to his father's government postings. What Daniel shared was not a rumor, not a legend passed around for entertainment, but a memory he said had stayed lodged in his bones for decades, unchanged, unsoftened by time. According to Daniel, this incident occurred in 1987, shortly after his family relocated to the East Coast following his father's transfer. His father, Robert Miller, was employed by a federal rail infrastructure department and had recently been reassigned to Washington, D.C. The move was meant to be temporary, a career step that promised stability, good schooling for the children, and proximity to relatives who already lived in the city. Daniel was 4 years old at the time, his younger brother barely too young to understand fear yet old enough to remember faces. Their mother, Laura, had been hesitant about the move, but Robert insisted. Government jobs required flexibility, and Washington offered opportunity. After weeks of searching, Robert found a rental property in a neighborhood called Ivy Hill, an older residential area on the outskirts of northeast Washington, known for narrow streets, aging row houses, and large trees whose branches seemed to block out the sun even during the day. The rent was unusually low for the area, which Robert saw as a blessing. The landlord, an elderly man named Thomas Green, requested 2 months advance rent, which Robert paid without argument. Another factor that reassured him was the proximity of his cousin's house, located just 1 street behind the rental. If anything went wrong nearby. The house itself had a peculiar layout. Upon entering through the main gate, there was an open courtyard where several old wooden cots were stacked, unused. Along the boundary wall stood 2 large oak trees and an overgrown maple, their roots cracking the cement. On the left side of the courtyard was the landlord's living quarters. On the right was a locked room, which Thomas explained belonged to his adult son who worked overseas and visited only once every few years. A narrow staircase led upstairs to a long corridor with 2 rooms. One was permanently locked. The other was the room Robert rented. There was no separate kitchen or bathroom upstairs. Laura cooked inside the room, near the door, while the bathroom was located downstairs beside the landlord's quarters. From the back of the room, a single window opened into a narrow alleyway that ran behind the house, so tight that no adult could pass through it sideways. When Robert showed the room to his cousin, she hesitated and warned him quietly that people spoke strangely about that house, that tenants never stayed long. Robert dismissed it. He was practical, budget-focused, and tired of searching. The family moved in during early February, when Washington winters still clung to the air. For the first few days, nothing happened. The landlord and his wife were polite, almost overly attentive. Laura, however, felt uneasy from the first night. She described a sensation of being watched, of the air feeling heavier after sunset. Robert attributed it to exhaustion from travel. On the 5th day, Robert had to travel out of the city for paperwork, telling Laura he would return by late evening. Unwilling to stay alone, Laura took the children to her cousin's house early that morning and returned only after dusk to prepare dinner. While cooking near the doorway, she noticed a shadow pass across the thin curtain hanging at the entrance. It was the unmistakable outline of a person walking past. Laura stepped into the corridor immediately, expecting to see Robert or the landlord, but found no one. She felt certain the adjacent locked room had been entered, yet its door remained shut. When Robert returned later that night, he denied coming upstairs earlier. He laughed it off, saying Laura was imagining things. That night, Laura barely slept, convinced she heard slow footsteps pacing the corridor until dawn. The next day, after Robert left for work, Laura went downstairs to wash clothes, leaving Daniel upstairs with his sleeping brother. Moments later, Daniel ran downstairs screaming, saying his mother was sitting upstairs with a strange woman. When Laura rushed back up, she found her younger son sitting on the bed, staring at empty space and laughing, as if someone unseen was playing with him. Terrified, Laura grabbed both children and fled downstairs, questioning the landlord, who avoided her eyes and dismissed her concerns. She did not return upstairs that day. That was the moment Daniel's email emphasized, the point where fear stopped being subtle and became undeniable. He ended the first part of his account by writing that whatever lived in that room had noticed them, and once noticed, it did not let go easily. Daniel explained that after that afternoon, Laura refused to step back into the upstairs room alone. She stayed with the children at her cousin's house until Robert returned from work that evening. When Robert arrived and found the room locked, he went directly to his cousin's place, where Laura recounted everything in a trembling voice. The cousin was not surprised. She reminded Robert that she had warned him before they moved in, telling him the house had a history no one liked to talk about. Robert, exhausted and still unconvinced, argued that fear spreads easily in unfamiliar places, especially when children are involved. Against his better judgment, Laura agreed to return for the night, telling herself she could endure anything for a few more days. Back in the room, she felt an immediate pressure in her chest, like the air had thickened. Behind the house, the narrow alley lay silent, yet the single window facing it seemed darker than it should have been, as if light avoided it. That night, Laura slept lightly, waking often to the sense that someone was standing near the bed. The following afternoon, while the children napped, Laura lay down beside them, pulling a blanket over her shoulders to protect against the cold. She drifted into shallow sleep, only to feel the blanket slowly slide away, as though unseen hands were tugging it with deliberate care. She sat up abruptly, heart racing, and scanned the room. Nothing appeared out of place. The corridor outside was empty. She told herself she had imagined it, yet her hands shook as she pulled the blanket back around her. As evening approached, Laura prepared dinner near the doorway. That was when she heard a soft knock against the window at the back wall. Instinctively, she stood and walked toward it, then stopped mid-step as reality caught up with instinct. They lived on the first floor. There was no balcony, no ledge, no possible way for someone to reach that window from the alley below. Before she could react, the knocking came again, harder this time, followed by a low growling sound, thick with rage. Laura screamed and ran out of the room. The landlord emerged from downstairs, alarmed by the noise, and followed her back up. Inside, Daniel sat on the bed crying uncontrollably, repeating that someone had come into the room and threatened to take them away. The landlord's face drained of color. He muttered excuses, suggesting the child had seen a cat or a shadow. Laura's fear turned to anger. She accused the landlord of hiding something, of renting out a room that was unsafe. That night, she took the children back to her cousin's house and refused to return. When Robert came home and heard everything, frustration overtook fear. He reminded Laura of the money already paid, insisting they stay at least until the month ended. Reluctantly, Laura agreed to try one last time. The next day was Sunday. Robert was home, and the presence of another adult gave Laura a false sense of security. That morning passed quietly until Robert went downstairs to bathe. Laura prepared breakfast with her back to the bed where Daniel lay half asleep. Without warning, Daniel was thrown from the bed, landing hard on the floor. He screamed that his mother had pushed him. As Laura rushed to him, she heard a woman's voice whisper sharply near her ear, ordering them to leave or face death. Panic consumed her. She grabbed Daniel and ran toward the stairs, only to feel a violent shove from behind. Mother and child tumbled down several steps before Robert reached them. Daniel's head was bleeding. Robert, shaken and angry, accused Laura of being careless. She tried to explain, but fear had robbed her of words. That evening, while Laura and the children stayed at her cousin's house, Robert returned alone to the room to write a letter home. Sitting by the window, he heard the knocking again. Thinking it was a thief, he struck the window with a stick and shouted a warning. The knocking stopped. Moments later, An unnatural heaviness filled the room. When Robert pulled back the curtain, he saw a young woman floating outside the window, her eyes wide, her hair hanging loosely across her face, her lips forming a silent threat. She promised death if they did not leave. Robert fled immediately. The next morning, he told the landlord they were vacating. The landlord resisted, then suggested sending the family away for a few weeks. Robert refused. They moved out that day. Days later, neighbors revealed the truth. The locked room belonged to the landlord's daughter, who had taken her own life after her parents forbade her marriage. Her spirit, filled with rage and abandonment, was said to still roam the house. Daniel ended his email by stating that no family ever stayed there long, and those who tried always left carrying something invisible that never truly faded.